Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, one, good evening, all. And of course, welcome to the first of our two Christmas specials, as we are inching ever closer towards the festive season as we pass through the month of December. Perhaps we should emulate our great Victorian forebears and celebrate the Christmas season by eating and drinking as much as we possibly can. The Victorians have given us many parts of our Christmas Yuletide experience, from Christmas cards to Christmas crackers. And of course, they made the fashion very popular of the German fashion of having the Christmas tree within the house. Although, of course, they would light real waxen candles and need to set a fire watcher to make sure that they didn't burn the entire house down. This is one of their more alarming traditions, and just as the Christmas ghost story is, they would often compete for tales of blood-chilling terror to chill the blood around the Christmas frivolities. So let's do our best tonight, shall we? And for my first tale this evening, I recall an experience of mine, must have been some 9 or 10 years ago. Sevastopol had fallen in the spring, and the Peace of Paris followed on in March. And so trade routes were just beginning to open up once again with the Russian Empire. Now, I, as a junior solicitor, had been sent hither and thither to the Polish and indeed the Russian capitals on matters of business and matters of law for that business. So I was very much looking forward to a December spent back home in England, and indeed to a Christmastide spent with my most excellent friend, Mr. Jonathan Jelf. Now, he was the esquire of a very fine country manor of Dumbleton, which was in Clayborough within East Anglia. Now, usually I would go pheasant shooting with him in October, but that had been off the cards because of my travels. So it was the perhaps even pleasanter time of Christmas that I was to spend with him. So I settled matters in Liverpool when I arrived, and then down in London, and then I booked myself passage on the 4:15 express up on the Great East Anglian line. And of course, I would be met at the station for the 9-mile journey from Clayborough Station to the Dumbleton residence by their own pony and trap. And I was looking forward immeasurably to all of the celebrations, like a schoolboy looking forward to his halls. And so I settled myself within the train carriage. It was a clinging, chilly damp to that December day that gathered about, with condensation upon the windows and drips upon the door handles, and a sort of a fog gathered about the gloomy station. But I was in good spirits nonetheless, and I had made myself as snug as a bug in a rug within my compartment. By means of a small matter of money changing hands, I had managed to get sole use of my compartment, and the guard had locked me in. So imagine my shock, my dismay, my disappointment, when I saw a gentleman who was hurrying up along the platform turn towards my compartment, and by means of a private key let himself in and sat opposite me. I mean, I ask you. Well, he set his umbrella down, he set his case down and his heavy travelling mac, and he removed his hat and replaced it with a Scotch cap for the journey. And I realized at that moment that I recognized the gentleman. It was Mr. Dwerrihouse, a man who I had met on one occasion some 3-4 years before at the very manor house that I was travelling to. In fact, I do believe he was a relation of the Jelfs. I think first cousin of Jonathan's wife. Yes, I thought so. He was a very well-to-do gentleman, a far greater solicitor than myself at that time, certainly, and a man of some considerable means, so much so that the butler treated him with the greatest of deference, even though he treated the general with some form of contempt. And so, after Mr. Dwerryhouse had cast one or two curious looks towards me, I ventured into conversation. Mr. Dwerryhouse, I believe? Yes, yes, I am. And you are? You have me at disadvantage. Oh, we met briefly some 3 years ago. I wonder if you are traveling up to the same destination as myself. I met you up at the Jelfs residence. Ah, Dumbleton. Yes. I thought I recalled the face, but not the name. Um, William Langford, sir. William Langford. I was a school friend of Jonathan's, and I often go up and stay there, sometimes for the shooting and sometimes for Christmastide. Yes, I think I do recognize you. So are you traveling as far as me? No, I'm sure you have only pleasure in sight. I, however, have a matter of business to attend to. Deeply concerning and difficult business. Oh, very well, of course. I shall venture there, of course, if I can resolve these financial matters. I'm sure you have heard about the extension of the line. Well, no, in fact, I've been away myself on business, away to Russia, in fact. Ah, well, let me tell you then. The Great East Anglia Line are extending by means of a branch connection towards Stockbridge. It was my suggestion, point in fact. And Stockbridge is really coming on in the world, and what they need to assume their proper place in society is a proper train line extension that will reach them down towards London. So it has been my instigation with the firm. You are part of the East Anglia line, then. My interest is threefold, in fact. I am their principal solicitor. I am a large stockholder, and indeed I am a director upon the board. Oh, well, right, marvellous. Now, you see, Mr. Dwerryhouse continued on from there to go into great detail about his pet project. In fact, he couldn't speak about anything else, not for the whole journey, no. And he went into every single obstacle that had met his path in this suggestion, from all of the different esquires who had issue with a train line running through their estates, to the fact that the residents of Stockbridge needed some convincing that they did indeed need a branch line towards them. I must confess I slightly drifted off at one or two points. I was finding myself flagging a little in something of a malaise. And it was the words £75,000 that rather woke me from my stupor. £75,000. Well, that is quite a considerable sum. Yes, a considerable sum to carry about with one's person, but only a fraction of what we shall need, of course. You mean to say that you're carrying £75,000 on your person? Yes, I do rather think I have made myself improperly understood. No, sorry, I'm just catching up. So that is for the full extension? No, that is to take the line as far as Mollingford. We'll need a great deal more financing, but this must be conveyed there this evening. Ah, right. So you go only so far as Blackwater? Yes, and there I shall have a carriage to Mollingford. Well, is there any message you wish me to convey over to the Jelfs? Yes, why don't you convey to them that I shall join them for Christmas if I can, if this important business is resolved. Anything else at all? Yes. You can tell my cousin that she needn't burn down the house on my account on this occasion. Good Lord, were you subjected to a conflagration last time you were there? Only a small one. They put me up in the blue room, as they usually do. But it had not been stayed in since the last Christmas. and rooks had taken to nesting in the chimney breast. It had not been swept properly, and so the entire room filled with smoke. Oh, right, well, I shall be sure to mention it. Thank you. At that moment, we were heading towards Blackwater Station, and the guard came through our compartment at that moment. He checked my pink slip, and I was indeed heading onwards towards Claver itself. He cast a glance in Mr. Dwerrihouse's direction, but did not stop, did not check his ticket, and carried onwards. That was rather strange. Oh, they never check me. I travel for free as a director, you understand. Oh, yes, of course. Makes perfect sense. He was beginning to ready his possessions. He took off the Scotch cap and reattached his hat and picked up his umbrella and his case and his coat and the like, and turned back to me with that rather old-fashioned turn of phrase. Thank you, Mr. Langford, for your society. And then, as the train pulled into the station, he stepped off at the station of Blackwater. I only noticed, glancing down at the floor, that he must have dropped his cigar case. There was one just by where he had sat, and I bent down to pick it up, and indeed it was monogrammed. J.D. for Jonathan Dwerrihouse. And so I waved to one of the guards and said, how long do we have here? Just a minute and a half, sir. Right, I'll be quick then. And I leapt off of the train, and I hurried along the platform to try to catch him up. I could see him just ahead of me. He had stopped, thankfully, just by one of the gas jets, and he was in deep conversation with a gentleman there, perhaps the man who had come to pick him up, I don't know. The fellow had blonde hair and thin moustache, and he was wearing a grey tweed suit. I remember that. They were standing directly under the gas jet, so I could see their faces illuminated quite close, but I nearly tripped over a piece of luggage, and then when I looked up, neither of the gentlemen were there. They had gone. It was like some conjurer's trick in a pantomime. I looked around for a moment. There was no doorway nearby, no staircase. It was just a bare, sparse piece of platform. But I could hear the whistles going off of the guards, and so I had to hurry back as swiftly as I could towards the train. Rushing as I did, I just managed to get through the door as they built up a head of steam, and off we went again. But that was turning over in my mind, that curious disappearance. It turned over in my mind for the rest of the train journey, and indeed for the journey by horse and cart all the way up towards Dumbleton Manor, when then it was quite driven out of my mind by the door swinging open and warm firelight flooding out onto the porch. Oh, my good chap, excellent, you've made it at last. Jonathan Jelf was a wonderful and welcoming host. Right, now I'm afraid there's no time to stop for pleasantries. She's rather on the warpath. We've got to get into dinner, so up you go, quick smart, get changed as swiftly as you can, and I will see you down in the drawing room. And so I did. Off I went, following the butler. I went, and I was getting changed for dinner, but maybe it was this curiosity of the journey that was playing upon my mind, but I was making all manner of mistakes. I could not find my studs for a moment, so I could not attach my cuffs and my collar, and then I did the waistcoat buttons up skew whiff, and then, well, by the time that I'd got down to the sitting room, they were already calling us into dinner, so I only had a few moments of pleasantries with the lady of the house before I had suddenly a former vicar's wife on one arm and a former squire's wife on the other, and soon we had to go straight escorting them into dinner. Now, I will not bore you with every detail of the dinner. They are much the same across the land. East Anglian ones are no different. There was the usual esquires and gentlemen of the countryside. There was the usual turkey and haunch of venison at the feast. And I was sat between these two ladies, and their conversation was only, and I mean only, about babies, which was, of course, terribly tedious and dull. So when there came a lull in the more general conversation, and I saw Jonathan was set to carve, I took the opportunity by some rather unlucky impulse to say, I had rather of an adventure on the train. I'm travelled up with someone who should hopefully be coming here for Christmas. Oh, really? I can't think who that would be. Major Thorpe, perhaps? No, family, in fact, one of your relations. Oh, well, I really can't think who that could possibly have been. Who was it? Give us a clue. Well, it was none other than Mr. Jonathan Dwerryhouse. There was silence, a deadly silence, spread all around the dining table, all eyes turned towards me. Good God in heaven, what had I said? Well, he did make something of a joke, said that you need not burn down the house on his account this time. Just make sure that the chimney of the blue room is swept for him. But not a thing. No one picked up the conversation, and in fact, Mrs. Jelf seemed rather crestfallen, with those tears gathering in the corner of her eyes. Just at that moment, Colonel Prendergast of the skirmishers made a valiant attempt to throw himself forwards into the breach. Langford, you've been off in Russia, haven't you? Yes, away for a time. Good. Well, tell us all about it, old chap. What's going on over there? And so I made some rather lame attempt at coming back into the conversation, but Prendergast was good to his military training and kept up the assault until others joined in with us. Well, once the ladies had left the table and the gentlemen were smoking their pipes, I sneaked across to Prendergast and asked him, what on earth did I say? What caused that manner of unpleasantness? For we managed to bridge over the conversation, but we did not repair it all dinner long. Well, good Lord, old chap, you mentioned that man, Dwerryhouse. Well, what's the matter with mentioning Mr. Dwerryhouse? Well, no, he has absconded. He ran off with £75,000 in his pockets of train line money. Good Lord, 75,000. Well, that's exactly the sum that he had mentioned to me that night. Curiouser and curiouser. Well, that evening, Jonathan Jelf came to my room and spoke to me about the matter as soon as we could find a moment alone together. Well, look, old chap, I'm not going to ask you whether or not you were sure it was him. That story alone about the blue room and the conflagration proves that it absolutely must have been Mr. Dwerryhouse. But he has been absent these past 3 months. Did he not mention anything about it? No, nothing at all. How did he look? Well, he looked rather anxious, I have to say. Quite pale, quite hollow and gaunt of features. Well, I suppose being on the run for 3 months will do something like that to you. Good Lord, it's been terribly trying, I have to say, for Marjorie. My wife believes that he did perhaps take the money and then had a pang of conscience and then has been wondering about how he might return it. Your story only confirmed this to her, and she thinks that the train company has now allowed him to carry on with the whole business and take the financing straight to the branch line. Well, your wife is possessed of the milk of human kindness, but she does not think like a board of governors for a train company, I'm quite sure. If he did return, they would not be so generous as to let him carry on as if nothing had happened. Well, quite. I mean to get to the bottom of this. You fancy joining me? Yes, absolutely, of course I can. And so we set out together upon the morning, by the pony and trap to Clayborough, and then by the train to Blackwater station. There we alighted in the morning. I took the cigar case with me, for if we did manage to locate Mr. Dwerryhouse, I could give it back to him. We spoke with the station manager, who was very dour about the whole business. We asked him whether or not he had seen recently Mr. Jonathan Dwerryhouse, and he said, no, I haven't, and not likely I am too. Not in the last 3 months. That villain and a rogue. Now, wait just a second, said Jonathan Jelf. We don't know whether or not this whole matter has been some kind of a terrible misunderstanding, old chap, and the benefit of the doubt must be given until it is resolved. No, I interjected. Now, what we really need to do is speak to the guard who was on the train, the 4:15 express yesterday. Where might we be able to speak with him? Well, right here, sir. If you just wait here until 1 o'clock, you should be able to speak to him. Ah, marvelous. Well, thank you. We went for a stroll up and down the lane and returned by 1 o'clock. And we waited as the new locomotive puffed its way into the station. We had only a few moments to speak to the guard, and so we interrogated him as swiftly as we could, asking him whether or not he recalled me being on the train. Yes, he did. And we asked him whether or not he recalled Mr. Dwerryhouse sharing my compartment. Well, that he did not. Oh, so you were quite alone in your compartment. I mean, gave me a farthing for it, and I locked you in there, sir. Yes, but he had a private key. He let himself in. I don't recollect that at all, sir. As far as I saw, you were alone all the way through. And did you change over at any point during the journey? No, I followed it all the way through up to Clayborough, sir. That was very strange. Well, he got back on his train and puffed off, and I turned to Jonathan Jelf. I can't explain it. It's impossible. I mean, unless the man was in cahoots with Mr. Dwerryhouse in some way. Well, old chap, there is one other possibility. I mean, he might have dreamt it all, but how could I possibly have dreamed it? I mean, all of the instances that he talked about that I had no knowledge of whatsoever. Well, and the cigar case that I picked up of his as well. Yes, I suppose. That really is a stumper, isn't it? It was just within a week, in fact, staying still with the Jelfs, that I received a letter from the Great East Anglian Train Board, sent from their General Secretary. It demanded that I make an appearance at a tribunal they were to have, and explained the entirety of this matter to the board. Gave no reason nor apology that they might demand my presence. Still, we resolved to go down there, Jonathan and I, and so we took the train and presented ourselves before the great conclave of the East Anglian Train Board, all sat around a great heavy table of green baize, and the chairman sat directly opposite us. He asked me to relay all of the business that I had, and told me that he had heard the matter from one of the guards and asked to hear my side of things. Well, I told him that the last time I had seen Mr. Dwerryhouse was on the 4th of December upon the 4:15 express, and I told him the particulars of the journey. Well, he looked puzzled, as did the board, and he reached for a silver bell beside him and rang it to summon forth the very guard that we had questioned at Blackwater station. Now, that guard gave exactly the same account then, that he had locked me within a private compartment, and that I had sat there quite alone for the entirety of the journey. Well, being contradicted so in society was rather embarrassing, I must say, and the board did look rather puzzled. The chairman said, "Mr. Langford, do you have anything to say now that your account has been questioned?" Well, nothing really to say other than to repeat myself, but when we got to Blackwater station, I saw Mr. Dwerryhouse get off the train, and he dropped his cigar case, which I hurried after him to give, and he was in conversation with a gentleman there on the platform. Ah, conversation, you did not mention this. Who was he speaking to? Well, I didn't know the gentleman, but he had a sandy blonde hair, a thin moustache, and he was wearing a charcoal grey tweed suit. I could see him quite clearly under the gas jet, but I could see I had lost their attention. They were now murmuring amongst themselves. I had clearly put the cat amongst the pigeons in some way. Well, they reached for the same silver bell and rang it once again. I think it would be helpful now if we have the logbooks checked. Please summon the Undersecretary, Mr. Rex, to read them out to us all. So there was some calls for Mr. Rex to be brought forwards, and indeed another gentleman was brought into the chamber. A gentleman with sandy blonde hair and a thin moustache, wearing, in fact, exactly the same suit as he had been on the platform when I had seen him. That is the fellow. Now be careful, Mr. Langford, what you are saying and whether you are casting accusations about the place. Mr. Rex, might I ask where you were upon the 4th of December? Yes, sir. Oh, where else would I be? I was in the office, sir, under Mr. Hunter. In the office under Mr. Hunter, is that right, Mr. Hunter? Yes, right. Well, Mr. Langford, it seems that your account cannot be corroborated from any source. And so I rather think that you are a dreamer of dreams, and that you conjure with your imagination, a rather dangerous habit, if you don't mind my saying so. And so I think there is no point in taking this inquiry any further. Now, hang on just a moment. I saw that man over there speaking with Mr. Dwerryhouse upon the platform at Blackwater Station. As plain as I see you now, I saw him there. They were discussing something very intently underneath the light of the gas jet. And at this moment, Jonathan Jelf was tugging upon my elbow. William, look over there. Look over there. Look at the man Rakes. And I turned and I looked and I saw Mr. Rakes had gone white as a sheet, right, white to the very lips. His lips were trembling, and he was trying to extricate himself from the room, shuffling backwards, reaching for the door handle. Well, although it was a perhaps uncivilized approach, I darted across the room and grabbed him by the arm and dragged him front and center in front of the chairman. I said, look at the man's face. Look. Do you have anything further to add, Mr. Rakes? No, sir. No, I've got nothing whatsoever to add. I couldn't have been there, sir. I mean, I was 200 miles away or more in Devonshire. Devonshire? Devonshire? What's this about Devonshire? You said that you were in the office under Mr. Hunter. Yes, I haven't taken a moment's holiday, not since September. So why did you mention Devonshire? Where did he go upon holiday, Mr. Hunter? Devonshire, right. Well, September. That would have been the time when Mr. Dwerryhouse disappeared. What manner of mystery is this? Jonathan Jelf stepped forward. I'll tell you what manner of mystery this is, Chairman. This is cold-blooded murder. I mean, the man practically admitted to that. But no, I didn't admit to anything of the sort. I never said anything like that. No, I never murdered. No, I mean, I never meant to hit him so hard. Hit him so hard? What are you speaking of, sir? Clearly, this is a matter that cannot be taken forward by this board. It must be given over to Sir Robert Peel's police service. Do not let Mr. Rakes from your sight, gentlemen. Let us summon the police. And indeed, the police were summoned. At Mr. Dwerryhouse's name was now left untarnished, for it would appear that his body had been hidden amongst the bushes and brambles close by Blackwater Station by Mr. Augustus Rakes. He stood trial for the murder, and indeed swung for it. But there was a question remaining. Who on earth had I seen upon the 4th of December on the 4:15 express? If Mr. Dwerryhouse had been dead since September, What on earth was going on? And it was a question that would not resolve itself, I have to say. If you wish to see Mr. Rex, or indeed Mr. Dwerryhouse, you can see them now at Madame Tussaud's, for they have made up a very fine likeness of Mr. Rex in the Hall of Murderers, just close by to Jack the Ripper, and he is stood there beneath a gas jet, close by Mr. Dwerryhouse, or at least the image of him. And they have done rather a magnificent job, I have to say. It is very like the image of the man that I saw that night upon the 4:15 express. Now, it should be said that young solicitors talk to one another. We are prone to gossiping about cases and about all sorts of happenstances, and I have told that story before to a friend of mine, Johnson, a man very much like myself, a young solicitor of his day. And when I told it to him, he got a very far-off look in his eyes. And once I had finished telling him my story, he told me his. I will do my best to render it to you all in the same vein that he accounted it to me. Not guilty was the verdict carried out by the court. And the great solicitor, Arthur Wilbraham, the great KC defender who was triumphant, was not there to hear that verdict of not guilty carried out. But his junior, Johnson, was in the room and carried the verdict across like lightning to his superior. Well, it's what we expected, I think. To be honest with you, I'm just glad it's over with. Mr. Wilbraham met the news without any great sign of emotion, any great reveling in his triumph for getting the murderer, John Turk, off by means of a defense of insanity. Perhaps because Mr. Wilbraham thought, just like everyone who had been in that courtroom, hearing all manner of grisly, ghastly details, that if there ever was a man alive who deserved the gallows, it was John Turk, the murderer. Well, I'm glad too, said Johnson. I mean, particularly as we've had to sit there and hear all of those details all the livelong day. He and his superior were more than just employed and employer. They were friends by means of family and other reasons. It was why he had been given the job, in fact. And Mr. Wilbraham turned to him and said, well, I know that you are now looking forward to a Christmas away, aren't you, Johnson? Oh, yes, yes, rather. It's not simply because I'll be able to get the morning boat now that I'm over the moon, really. It's more, I won't have to look at the murderer's face any longer in the courtroom. The way his pale face turned towards you with those black eyes of his, with that quiff of black hair that always drooped down across his face. The way he stared, you could see all of the murder conjured in his eyes every day. And point of fact, the trial details, what he had done, how he had dismembered that poor woman, and how he had packed her in lime, packed her away into that. Don't dwell on such things. These pictures have a nasty way of coming back to you. So get yourself away on holiday. Enjoy yourself. go off and have some fun skiing in the mountains, but don't break your neck. I'm going to need you back here. Well, yes, quite. There is one last thing that I wanted to ask, if I may. Yes, do go ahead. Could I borrow a kit bag by any chance? I quite forgot to procure one, and then if I get the morning train down to the boat, the shops won't be. Of course, dear boy, you're very welcome to borrow one of mine. I'll have Henry bring one over to your rooms tonight. Is that good enough? Thank you. Very kind. I'll, of course, take very good care of it. No need. Thank you, dear boy. And off Johnson went. He went and dined at his club, and then hurried on towards Bloomsbury, where his house was, well, his rooms within a house. He occupied one of those gaunt, tall, skinny buildings. He was upon the very top floor there. There were some vacant floors just beneath, and there were all manner of other tenants further down the household, none of whom he knew particularly well. It was a rather dreary house, and in the cold December sleety rain, it was particularly dreary, and he was very much looking forward to a change of scenery, to his holidays away. When he came in, Mrs. Monks, the landlady, the proprietor of the establishment, turned towards him. "Oh, young master, there was a gentleman came here, dropping something off for you." "Ah, that'll be the kit bag. Marvellous. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Monks. Oh, just to let you know that I am off on my holidays abroad. I will leave a forwarding address for mail." "Right you are, sir. Well, have yourself a very Merry Christmas, sir, and hopefully you'll have better weather than we have here." "Yes, better weather, yes, I certainly hope so, yes, marvellous." And off Johnson went, all the way up the staircases, threading through the building, up to his rooms. He set the kettle on the stove to make himself a coffee, whilst he got settled in to the matter of packing. And the matter of packing was not disagreeable. It conjured straight to his mind the images of the snowy-capped mountains that he would soon be determinedly skiing all the way down. He could forget all of the unpleasantness of the scenes that had been recounted day after day within the courtroom. The kit bag was made of strong, sturdy canvas. It was one of those traditional types that had holes in the top, which you can slide the brass bar and padlock through. It was a rather shapeless thing, but its capacity was enormous, so there would be no need to pack carefully. You could throw pretty much anything into it. So he began with his outdoor things, with his heavy woolen coats, with his trousers, with his knickerbockers, with the puttees, with his snow boots and snowshoes and such like. And then came the matter of, they might be dressing for dinner, might they not, at the ski lodge. Better take the dress suit as well, and the shirts. That's the worst of it, though, with these kit bags. You see, they are so shapeless. How does one fold things within? At that moment, there was a furious gust of wind, even worse than from before, outside, howling away across the world of black rooftops out there. He took a curious glance towards the clock. 10 o'clock it was, that low moaning sound from outside as the wind whistled through. Right, well, he rather pitied the Londoners who would be staying for a London's winter, whereas he would have the pleasure of fine powdered snow and rosy-cheeked girls, and that reminded him, of course, dancing pumps and dress socks. He would be needing those to dance the night away. So out he went to the landing, to where the linen cupboard was. And whilst he was there, he heard a curious sound. It was a step, a tread, furtive, secretive almost, quiet, somewhere down below on the staircase. Well, he paused for a moment to listen, to hear who might be making that tread. Was it Mrs. Monks coming upstairs with the last of the mail for the day? No, perhaps though stealthy, the tread was too heavy for Mrs. Monks. Perhaps one of the other lodgers, he did not know. But what would they be doing in the empty apartments beneath? Well, back to the bedroom it was, to pack his dancing pumps and his dress shirts as best he could. The kit bag was now standing about 2/3 full and was standing upright on the floor like a bag of flour. Now, it was at this point that Johnson noticed that the kit bag was not of the newest order. It was rather dirty. It's seen a fair bit of rough treatment. Clearly, Mr. Wilbraham wasn't trusting him with one of his nicer kit bags. But it seemed sturdy enough, at least, and he carried on with his packing, setting the dancing pumps within, and indeed the socks folded up within them. He turned his mind over to wondering who it could have been downstairs, wandering about. I mean, Mrs. Monks had not been up with the letters. And in fact, now he thought about it, he could hear it again. That soft but heavy tread coming nearer. For the first time that night, Johnson began to feel rather creepy, rather as if something untoward was happening. And almost to emphasize that feeling, the top of the kit bag, the flap of it, fell forwards, and it had an alarming appearance in the shadows from the lantern light that he had lit within his rooms, almost the shape of a face, with the brass eyelets for eyes, and the shadow cast by the flap, almost like a quiff of dark hair falling forwards across the face. Well, Johnson laughed at himself for giving himself a fright. That despite it was probably this horrible case still lingering onwards in his mind, still playing about with him. But the step was still there, the tread from somewhere down below. And so perhaps this was simply generating this feeling of unease and disquiet in him. So without some degree of trepidation, Johnson steeled himself and went downstairs with his lantern to have a look who it was who was wandering about down there. Well, he looked around. The rooms were empty. There was not enough of a stick of furniture to hide a dog behind. So there was no one there, clearly. He called down to Mrs. Monk, down the staircase, right down to far beneath, but his voice got carried away by the roar of the wind, and so just echoed off into the darkness. Was the sound just the wind? Surely not. It was a human footfall. Well, he went back upstairs, continued his packing, looked across at the clock, and realized that by this time it was getting on towards midnight. So, finished up the coffee, had a last pipe, and he sat there thinking, mulling things over. The footfalls on the stairs, the images that had come to his mind. And it's curious, that matter of where fear begins, when it begins to take a hold of you. You might not notice it at first, but increment by increment, layer by layer, like a film of ice forming over a lake, that fear can slowly build up until you notice that you are genuinely nervous. It was like this now for Johnson. He felt almost as if there was some person who was deeply objecting to something he was doing, as if he was crossing some invisible barrier, some matter of conscience or guilt. Why he should feel like that, why he should feel as if he was doing something wrong, something that someone would disagree with, he could not really conjure why. Simply a matter of nerves. And the mountain air would fix all of that. Mountain air, of course. His snow glasses. You must not forget those. So he went back through to the sitting room to go and see if he could find them out from a cupboard. It was as he crossed by his own doorway that he saw the figure. He saw the man stood upon the staircase, looking up at him, stooping with a curious gait, with his hand up on the banister, staring into his rooms. Who is it there? Who on earth are you? But there was no answer from the figure on the stairs. Retreating away for a moment, Johnson steeled up his courage as best he could, picked up the lantern and made direct approach, stepped straight out onto the landing, and the man wasn't there. There was no figure. Some shadow in the darkness? Had that been all he had seen? No, he was certain. Back he went into the better light of the front room. But as he walked, as he went through into the front room, he heard footfalls. Footfalls that followed him and seemed to sneak away into his bedroom. Whoever it was had clearly darted back down the stairs and had now made an entrance into his own private rooms. What intention did the fellow have? What did he mean by breaking an entry like this? Who is it? Who's there? Johnson called again. He would have to make approach into the bedroom. He would have to get to the bottom of this business. And as he stood in the doorway looking in, he thought he saw the curtains move slightly. Clearly, the fellow had hidden himself there. So, gathering up his courage, he had stepped across the boundary into fear, but there were still some ways to go before he would step into the boundary of terror or horror beyond. So he marshaled himself, strode forwards and pulled the curtains back to stare out the window onto a wet London street and the dark rooftops beyond, where he turned, headed towards the cupboards and opened every one of them. There was nothing in the wardrobe. He checked underneath the bed, and as he stood back up, he had to catch himself, for he had nearly tripped over the kit bag that he had left standing up in the middle of the room, but it had been in the middle of the room, not so close to his bed. The bag had moved. It had most certainly moved. He was quite particular about where he had left it. Were his senses just playing tricks on him? Was everything now some boundary of the imaginary that he was conjuring about him? Bear in mind that everything that took place for Johnson that night took place for one suffering this increment of fear. However, he maintained a control of himself as best he could, and yet it is in those kind of moments, in those lonely hours, that the mental plates that have been exposed to horrors in the past may be developed, that they may be fully formed in the dark rooms of our minds. And so all the horrid details of the case that he had witnessed, that he had heard about within the courtroom, started to play before Johnson's mind. He felt like he saw the image of the murderer, John Turk, from every corner about him. This is all rubbish and nerves. I shall finish the packing and I shall go to bed. And so, humming a song, a good deal perhaps louder than he normally would, he made his approach towards the kit bag to finish up the packing, and then he could set all the matter to one side. And as he opened the flap back up of the kit bag, it was the first time he had noticed, just inside the canvas rim, just inside, there was a stain, a splash of crimson. Well, Johnson jerked back, as if he had been burnt, as if he had been stung. And as he stepped back away from the kit bag, he heard something that perhaps ratcheted him forwards towards the boundary of terror. It was a long, drawn-out human sigh. It was not the wind. It was a man's voice sighing close by him. "Who is it?" he meant to say in a commanding voice, but it came out barely a whisper within that room. And he stared at the bulging sides of the canvas sack of the kit bag. And he looked in its open rim at the stain. And it was at that moment when the kit bag gave a lurch forwards. Johnson collapsed backwards, for within that moment he saw a man's head poke up as if he had been hiding himself behind the kit bag and then sink back down behind it. Scrabbling at the door, Johnson reached for the handle, but there was a conglomerate of coats and jackets, and so he was reaching his hands in, and the sleeves were getting in the way, and even worse than that, as he fumbled for the door handle, he must have clicked the brass light switch, and the entire room plunged into darkness. Well, if Johnson had not been possessed of true pluck, he might have done all manner of mischief to himself in the dark there. But two things happened that managed to breach the final boundary and transport him from terror into abject horror. The first was another long, drawn-out human sigh, almost as if right by his ear. But even worse than this, even worse, was the sound of the kit bag shuffling by means of jerks and starts across the floorboards towards him. He reached again for the door handle, scrabbling through the coats, but he could not find it. At least he might find the light switch. But did he really wish to switch on the lights? Was darkness perhaps not a blessing? Still, his first instinct won out, and he flicked on the light switch, and all at once wished he hadn't. The darkness had been a boon, for in that moment he saw before him, in the full blaze of the electric light, the man, John Turk. The murderer was stood before him. And it all made a horrible sense now. The dark stains of the canvas, the way that the sides of the sack bulged horribly outwards, and the memories from the courtroom, how the man had packed the dismembered body away in lime in just such a kit bag. Johnson could not speak. He was transfixed. And in that moment, the murderer, John Turk, lifted up his devil face with that black quiff of hair flopped forwards and looked towards him. And he said, "It's mine. This bag is mine, and I wants it back." Well, Johnson managed to find the door handle, flung it open, and collapsed away, but this was the last thing that he remembers. For he collapsed, unconscious, there upon the landing. Well, he was awoken by the voice of Mrs. Monk, ringing out, "Good Lord, young master, have you fallen asleep right here? Have you not gone to bed? Are you ill or something? There's a man here downstairs to see you." Do show him up, Mrs. Monk. Yes, I'm quite all right. I'm quite all right. Gathering himself, Johnson sat down in the chair by the fireside. The fellow who came up to him was Henry, from Mr. Wilbraham's offices. "Oh, sir, I'm terribly sorry. There was something of a mix-up yesterday. When Mr. Wilbraham was made aware of it, he sent me straight over to you." "Some kind of a mix-up?" "Yes, the kit bag that was sent over to you. I'm terribly sorry, but some kind of a mix-up at the courtroom, and well, this was the one Mr. Wilbraham meant to give to you, and there was over his arm a very new, pleasant-looking kit bag made of finest canvas. They somehow got it confused, and they sent the kit bag from the evidence to you, the kit bag of Mr. Jonathan Turk. Ah, I wonder if you might do me a favor and just empty out the kit bag in the bedroom. You needn't have a care about the things. Just empty it on the floor and take it away." "Yes, of course, sir. I'll take it off to the court now." And Johnson could hear the sounds of the kit bag being emptied next door. The fellow, Henry, came back out with the ugly stained canvas over his arm now. "There was one more thing, sir." "Yes, do carry on. Out with it." "Well, I know you have a great interest in the case, sir, in John Turk. I thought I might just let you know. Last night, he took his own life by means of poison, sir." "Good Lord. Do you know what time it was?" "It was 10 o'clock, sir. He left a note from Mr. Wilbraham as his solicitor, requesting that this kit bag be returned to him, requesting, in fact, well, that he be buried in it, just like he got rid of that poor woman, sir." Well, my friends, a rather horrible story, you must forgive me, for Christmas time. However, as I say, we must compete with one another for acts of terror and of horror and indeed fear around the Yule-side fireplace. And if you wish to join me upon the next occasion, we shall be competing for terror, because I will be joined. In fact, Cassandra Worthy will be back with me once again, which I'm very much looking forward to. And so we shall be telling the stories of the Shadow and indeed Smee. So, my friends, as I say, it is not our usual fortnightly break, because we are squeezing in another one, a Christmas special before Yuletide itself. So next Wednesday, the 21st, you are very, very welcome to join me by the fireside. But until such a time, good night, God bless, and have very pleasant dreams.